So this is Chris Morton of List. Now, to explain first what List is, because I have to say it took me a while when I first met you, Chris, to really work out what it is. So List basically offers millions of shoppers access to many more millions of products from a vast array of the world's top luxury brands. So about the only label that you can't find on List is Celine. The reason being that Celine does not have e-commerce. Now, there's a difference between e-commerce as we know it, or certainly as I used to know it, and the big thing is more than half of List staff are engineers and data scientists, so that instantly tells you this is a very different kind of company. This is a data company differing from that first wave of luxury online fashion companies in that it doesn't touch product at all, so it has no inventory. So it harnesses data intelligence to provide fashion analytics, or as they're known within the company, analytics. So I'm going to get Chris to tell us more about how List works, but first to put it in layman's terms. If you were to want, let's say, a black jacket by a certain designer in your size, List will search everything available, or pretty much everything available, in the world of luxury. So as Chris explained it the first time we met, it's as if you lose your house keys, you don't really only want to look under one cushion on the sofa. You want something that can search everywhere that you might go. List is also what's called a startup, although we're going to talk about what startup actually means now when companies that are startups are so big. So before we get to actually hear from you, Chris, just to explain a nail-biting moment when you were raising your first $1.5 million of seed capital happened during the time that Google announced it was launching as a fashion aggregator. And I remember, Chris, you saying to me, then we saw the product sighed with relief, and the investors doubled investment in us because it served as validation of our idea, but not done well. And you recalled one of the tech guys saying to you, Google building a fashion site is a bit like Gucci building a search engine. So with that, Chris, now I've been told to project because I understand that yesterday there was some audio issues, down to me, not down to these experts, obviously. If I'm shouting, you'll let me know. So Chris, our subject is luxury and data, opportunities versus perils. But is the first peril that we face that I haven't explained your company properly? I mean, you will do it in so much more articulate manner than I will. So please explain more about what List does.
No, I thought you did a good job.
All right, well, give us some numbers then.
Okay, so I mean, again, as background, we are a shopping destination without being a retailer and certainly not being a brand. So we will partner with the big department stores around the world, so Saks or Neiman Marcus or Lane Crawford, partner with hundreds of brands directly. You know, we've taken investment from Groupe Arnault, obviously of LVMH, work with many Kering brands as well. And through the products these retailers or brands sell on their own websites, we bring those products into our inventory, our virtual digital inventory. And so that way we can be comfortable that everything is 100% guaranteed, authentic. We don't have any of the concerns that might be concerning brands going into the Alibabas, perhaps, of the world. But it means that we have to have a very different skill set to a retailer. So a retailer might have to consider, the buy, stock days, operations, logistics, warehousing, deliveries, fulfillment, return. And these are all things that we don't have to think about because our partners do a wonderful job of that already. And that's why, to your point, we have to be majority data scientists and engineers because we have different challenges. For example, managing an inventory of 4 million items with 150,000 items coming in new every week. That is, to give you an idea, basically every day we have a department store's worth of inventory coming in that we have to understand. And the biggest challenge we have is how do we take these 4 million items and create a shopping experience for the customer that is delightful and engaging and effective. And in particular, when you are searching, having this large inventory is incredibly helpful to the customer because she can be sure that she's going to find what she's looking for because we have such a wide range of partners. But when it comes to discovery, to browsing, to not really sure what the customer wants, that huge inventory becomes our biggest weakness. And there's a massive challenge in not overwhelming the customer and understanding how do we create that best browsing experience. And again, we turn to data science and try to understand from a customer who we know very little about, what is she interested in? How do we understand how to tailor that browsing experience? If somebody, for example, lands on a Gucci product page and then clicks on dresses, what dresses do we show her? And why do we need to give her a different experience to somebody who might land on an Oscar de la Renta dress page and then go further, browsing further? And so online we have a wonderful opportunity to personalize based on data so that everyone can get a unique experience.
But what happens then? You mentioned Gucci. But what happens if you've built a sort of profile on the kind of woman that shops at Gucci, and it's based on, you know, the Tom Ford, Frida Giannini eras of Gucci, which are now gone, which were very, very sexy, very, very glamorous. And the designer at Gucci now is into kind of women looking like librarians. So your data is saying Gucci's sexy, and suddenly Gucci's librarian. How does data read that, and how does it lead the customer to the Gucci that they want?
I mean, so fashion is clearly a very dynamic industry. Everything is always changing. And if we had sort of a set, hard-coded models that we built in 2010 and didn't touch, it would not work. But we're fortunate to have 40 million people using the site in the last 12 months, and these people are constantly engaging with different products, doing different things, and our systems, the machine learning, they're built to learn how people are behaving. And if we see certain brand adjacencies, so perhaps the customer who liked the old Gucci aesthetic might like other aesthetics, we'll suddenly see those adjacencies make less sense, and in real time the system will learn. And again, in the physical world, we're constrained by physical things, and store designs have to look certain ways, and the store that you have has to stay in that place. Whereas digitally, everything is dynamic, everything can move, and in real time, so people's experiences on our site are different by virtue of where in the world they are, by virtue of what previous items and brands they've already been exposed to and had positive or negative interactions with. And I believe that is the way that all fashion e-commerce has to go. More and more intelligence, more and more personalization.
But how much do you know about us? Because this, on the other side, how much of our privacy are we surrendering to you so that we can go shopping?
So obviously when you use the site initially we don't know very much at all about you. And the aim is to build an increasingly improved experience so that customers then get more and more value. And also there's more and more barriers to using something else because you've already invested tacitly or quietly in this service. But I think more culturally, we have a track record as humans of giving up privacy for functionality. The fact that we carry a phone with us everywhere we go, the fact that we even sleep with it typically within arm's reach, suggests, it's a huge invasion to privacy. Anyone can call us at any time, send us notifications, distracting us, and yet we opt and pay lots of money to service providers and Apple and Samsung to have this invasion of privacy because the functionality we get is greater than the privacy we lose. And there are instances of people building services where that is not a good trade-off. There was an example of Google built a product called Latitude about 5 years ago, which allowed you to see where all your friends were in real time. You opened up Google Maps and you could see, here is Bob, Dick, and Sue and all this. And the world at that point was not ready for that. They did not want to be posting our location 24/7. It made, yes, serendipitous encounters. If I'm going home and I see that 10 of my friends are in a bar nearby, fantastic, I can go and have a drink with them before going to bed. But also,
we're instantly thinking of all sorts of examples where that wouldn't be so great.
Absolutely.
I'm sure everyone is thinking of something going, ooh, I don't want that.
Absolutely.
So now,
but one day, it may be right. And culture is always changing, and maybe what our kids or our grandkids decide is acceptable, maybe they think that's a worthwhile trade-off.
When you see somebody that is using a phone that's not a smartphone, what do you think? Because I know now when I see someone, CEOs, I don't know in the legal industry, but CEOs sometimes often have really old-fashioned phones, and I'm like, that's because you don't want to be tracked. Or if I see someone using one in a restaurant, I'm like, oh, you must be a secret agent. I have a vivid imagination. But what do old phones signal to you in your world of data and...
We're based in Shoreditch, so there's also the ironic hipster old phone as well. again, for some people who have, fears, concerns about being tracked, it's not clear to me that you are safer if you're sort of worried in the sense that I think your location based on where you're pulling phone signal from, regardless of how smart your phone is, as long as your phone is pulling signal from Vodafone or wherever, you can be tracked, and I think in some cases that can be used in a court of law against you. So I'm not sure if it's necessarily a lot safer, but maybe it's more, this is really complicated, maybe people don't want to adopt new technologies and find happiness in. Yeah.
Tell me about gathering information on all of us in a way that's positive, because I'm such a Luddite that initially when I shopped on Amazon years ago and it said, if you like this book, you might like this one, I was like, how wonderful. I didn't really even think they were trying to sell me another book. I just thought, this is brilliant. It's made my life more simple. But you've taken this to a much, much more sophisticated level.
Well, I don't know if we're more sophisticated than Amazon because I don't know how well they do it, but I know that Amazon's collaborative filtering, which is to say people who liked this book also liked this book, I've heard anecdotally that's sort of north of 30% of their sales. So it's incredibly, which is many, many billions, so incredibly impactful. Having said that, 50 years ago, if you have a favorite boutique and you walk into that and you see a sales assistant who knows you, they are also using information about you to decide what you like. So, yes, we can do this at greater scale and perhaps in less of a personal touch, but this is still something which has been happening, I think, for long before the internet came.
Let's talk about being an entrepreneur now, because in a room full of lawyers, I think there's some kind of science, cod or otherwise, that says that entrepreneurs are necessarily happy people because they are risk averse, whereas lawyers, you're supposed to be miserable people because you think about risk all the time. You're married to a lawyer, so you would know, is one of you happy and one of you less so?
Well, you'll have to ask my wife. No, I think both sides, both lawyers and entrepreneurs, I think have to be very aware of the risks. I think one of the sort of leading startup culture books is a book by Andy Grove, one of the leaders of Intel, which is called Only the Paranoid Survive, which is a great title. But I think the difference comes not in being aware of them, it's in how happy you are with them. You cannot take risks if you don't know what they are. You're just sort of blindly stumbling. And so, I think to start a business, it makes sense to understand what the risks are, but then you probably have to be somewhat deluded to believe that you will be able to overcome them. And they talked about Steve Jobs as having a reality distortion field. So he would just convince himself and convince others that these risks against the odds were completely surmountable. I think that sort of willingness to delude yourself is probably what separates.
So with you, it's obviously proved to be the opposite of delusional, but when you came into the fashion business, you weren't someone that knew a lot about fashion. You knew a lot about data. So that would have looked unlikely that you would have built what is now one of the biggest fashion empires. You've kind of built it under our noses.
So, I was interested in fashion as a consumer, but I've never worked in the industry at all. But I did have the fortune of watching Ukes grow, because in a previous life I was working as a venture capital investor, and the firm I worked for was fortunate to invest in Federico's business in 2001. And so I was sort of watching a bit from afar, but there is an odd pattern of people building large digital products who have not experienced that industry before. I don't think the people who built Uber had come from the transport industry. I don't think the people.
So they weren't a bunch of minicab drivers, for sure.
Or even minicab entrepreneurs or what have you. The folks who built Airbnb were not coming from the hospitality industry. The folks who built Spotify were not, music label execs. And there is a naivety that comes, which both means you'll make the complete rookie mistakes that nobody who'd spent 2 years in a music company would have made, or a fashion company. But you also, through that naivety, will make some fortuitous mistakes, some mistakes that will end up actually defining the product. And certainly in the digital space, where so many of the rules are different, it's very beneficial to have that naivety to really challenge all of the core assumptions to see what will work in this new world that hasn't worked for decades in the physical world.
What What is there in your background, I'm thinking more of your childhood background, that gives you this ability to be both very brave and risk pro, but you're also very strategic? So the things I know about you, which I'm going to share, you play chess, do you not? But you also play a very, is arcane the right word, sport? Don't you play Henry VIII tennis or that real tennis?
Played real tennis,
And
yeah.
I mean, do any of these things that you've done for a long time, do they play into your professional life? Is there something that you do things that are slightly off at the edge? And your childhood is unusual, isn't it? You come from a, dare I say, a very brainy family.
So I think there's maybe a few things. So my father is a professor at Oxford. My brother is a professor of quantum physics who recently left Oxford to UCL.
That's what my brother is too. I mean,
So I'm very much the black sheep and the stupid one in the family. But we also my father moved to NASA when I was 3 years old, and I remember very clearly one of the days going to the office with him, and we had to stop via a supermarket to buy some frozen turkeys. And then we went into the airbase, and he loaded these frozen turkeys into a cannon that he built, and he would fire these turkeys at windscreens because there was trouble with the spacecraft or jets hitting birds at 40,000 feet, and then he was designing a stronger windscreen. So it's a very unorthodox job, which probably set me thinking. And secondly, maybe more seriously, I grew up in the States, and I found the education system in the States, I was like a very sort of average school, was very different to when I came back to Europe. And to give you an example, in a class where they might have asked me, what is 7 times 8? In the US, I would have said 54, and they would have said, oh, you're almost there, try again. I would have said 55, and then finally 56, and they would have said, yes, well done. And when I came to the UK, and I put my hand up and I said 54, they said, no, next. And it created a very different attitude to failure, where you had to think really carefully, do I want to stick my hand up or not? Do I want to fail so visibly in front of all my peers in the classroom? Whereas in the States, that was not at all an issue. And in the startup industry, there are, in almost every sector, the US leads us. I would say actually within fashion technology is a European thing. Maybe music, maybe the arts, but in almost everything else, the US leads us. And I think partially that's because of the perception of failure and the way that we're taught that as young children.
How do you bring those lessons back into the company then? So you've built this company from the ground up. Do you allow people more space to fail?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is, and this is not just us, but in generally in the startup industry, move fast and break things, fail to learn. These are sorts of mantras that get kicked around because, again, everything is new and digital, but also everything is always changing. So when we started the business, no one was using their phone to shop, and that was in 2010. And now most of our traffic comes on mobile. And you have to constantly challenge these assumptions and test things to see like what direction are we all moving in as consumers? And certainly, as a team of a few hundred now, or 150, that can't just come from the founding team. That has to come from everyone. And so a lot of our job, or my job now, is to ensure these values and behaviors are adopted and embraced by the team, and so they feel comfortable in being able to fail and learn, and they're not worried about any stigmas. And again, we're building this in Europe, so there's kind of a cultural transplant versus in the US where people might be more used to that.
Can you actually sort of build yourself out of a job? That if you build a company to a certain size and you teach people that they're free to fail, that they have enormous freedom at work, can you as the CEO actually ever sit there one day and go, oh, well, they can all do this now? I mean, is that your risk? I don't think
it's the risk. I think it's the hope.
Oh.
And I mean that, like, I think it would be success for me is to hire and lead myself out of a job. I just don't believe that it ever really happens. And there's always an area that needs to be, supported or helped to grow, especially when everything's always changing. But that would be that would tell me that we did a great job of hiring and leading, that everyone was doing a great job without any leadership required.
You used the word startup. At what point does a company become a started? Or what word is there? I mean, a startup to me is a company that's relatively small. How big is your company?
Well, depends what measure. So
how would you give us the measures that we would like to hear?
So in terms of sales, the business is doing a few $100 million, and that's up from a standing start 5 years ago. So it's been growing about triple digit every year, and we would like to do another triple digit this year. I've spoken about the team, 150, which is not probably a very different ratio of sales to staff than a traditional retail or brand might have. And a lot in startup culture, this gets debated. Yeah. What is a startup? What is a scale up? Which is
is that the next term?
A scale up is what you apparently blossom into. Right. The consensus, if there is consensus, tends to be around growth. That a startup is there to grow incredibly quickly on a very meaningful scale. And so, as long as we are growing at triple digit, I would say that we're a startup. I think maybe when we go into mid double digit, we could say maybe we're more scaling up. But there are so many areas for us to grow right now. We are mostly in the US, a little bit in Europe. Don't do anything really in Australia or China. All these. People are more and more comfortable shopping online, on their phone rather, and online, and so the market is growing very quickly. E-commerce on the whole in luxury is growing at a decent double-digit clip. And then there's other areas like how do we tie together the physical inventory of all these stores around us and the digital inventory? And so with all these opportunities, I think we have to keep that startup mentality because there's so many new areas we can go into.
So a startup really is a way of thinking. It's a way of living. There isn't a next scale necessarily, as long as you keep this very fresh way of doing things.
Well, I think it's a mentality, but I think it's also, there's an empiric measurement, which is, are you growing fast enough to warrant it? Because
at what point in this growth do you bring lawyers into the picture?
So you mentioned that I'm married to a lawyer, and I've been with her for 10 years now. So lawyers' input came in very early. Let's say, do you think it's a good idea for me to quit my investment job to start this business? Was the first lawyerly question I asked my wife, who thankfully was very supportive of this. But more serious note, establishing a business, registering it, putting together documents for myself and my founder in terms of stock vesting. There's option schemes, things like that. I sort of did this myself, but with my wife's help. And then when those first investors came along, they looked at all those documents, which probably the ones that I've tried to make, and laughed and said, okay, here are some real documents. But yeah, I think it's important to do these things right early on because small mistakes will follow you around and bite you when you least expect them. And certainly, the first stage of a startup is to build certainly in our industry, to build a product, to build something that people use and get value out of. And then you think about, can you build a business? So can you make some money out of this? Which for us happened early, for Facebook and Twitter happened very late. And then finally, can you build a company? Can you build an organization of people? And then more of these structures around, perhaps more legal framework comes in there as well. And in fact, these things are not necessarily so sequential, but they happen sort of in tandem. And while you're most obsessed about building a product, you should be mindful about the sort of decisions you make on a company level, like should all the founders be vesting equity? So for example, there were 3 founders of our business, and after a year, there were only 2 of us. And we took the effort to ensure that all the founders were on a 4-year vesting schedule, which was I think the right thing to do, because otherwise, had we split the equity from day one, the founder who left would have an inordinately large share. And so it's worth thinking these things from the first day, when your tendency would be, can I build a product that people like?
And we heard earlier on about the people who had just moved in-house, who were kind of the lone lawyers in companies that had not been used to having lawyers, and some of the challenges that they faced. Do you have anyone in-house? Do you have a team in-house? Or
we do. I think she's actually in the audience somewhere there. She is waving her hand. So Emma, was a lawyer at a U.S. firm, and then joins us. We actually have another in-house part-time, and then I think a paralegal as well. And so we have a number of not only the option schemes, etc. So then employment contracts. Also, there are IP issues around our brand name, which we obviously care about protecting. There are contracts that we negotiate with the partners and brands we work with to sell their products, and so it's a sort of fairly active area of the business.
You mentioned earlier that the areas you haven't gone into are Australia, which we're not going to talk about, and China, which we are. So before you arrived, there was a very lively panel earlier about Alibaba, or should I say the people who are suing Alibaba. So we're quite up to speed on that. But as your business grows, the challenges of China and the Chinese shopper finding list.
God, I wish I had a good answer. I mean, as I mentioned, the areas, so most of what our business is US brands and US stores selling to US consumers, and we feel that we understand this dynamic fairly well. If we wanted to go into China, we know there is a lot of demand for the brands that we carry in our inventory, so that's tick. But there's also a litany of lessons to be learned from people who've gone in directly. I think people, so on the retail level, certainly people have gone in and pulled out. There are stories of people doing joint ventures with the leading internet businesses there, only to find that their concept effectively was copied and the JV was ignored. And so it seems that there are tremendous challenges. There's also pricing arbitrage opportunities, and lots of grey market happening there. And we are very mindful to do things the right way, which again we feel we can do that in the US where we have a lot more control and knowledge. So we don't want to start getting anywhere near potentially contentious areas like grey market. So the good news is that we don't necessarily have to go there to continue the growth that we're seeing. Other markets outside of the core ones today, perhaps South Korea, perhaps Japan. You laugh maybe at Australia, but that is a significant market, particularly from buying from overseas. And so I think that's where we'll focus, and we'll watch enthusiastically to see who figures this out. But it's not an obvious one to me.
Give us some insights into how people shop. For example, I don't know where I learnt this, but don't people, if people buy red dresses, they are most likely to return them? And aren't there things like if you buy on a Thursday, you're most likely to keep things, and if you buy on a Saturday, you're most likely to return them? I mean, these kind of things, are they apocryphal or are any of those true?
No, so this again takes us back to being a data business, and we love observing these trends to understand how we can perhaps market products better and build a better experience. So we did see that red dresses have a much higher return rate than black dresses because red has many different shades and is sometimes quite a challenging color, I'm told, to pull off, whereas black is black and black looks good, hopefully. And then on days of the week, we were fascinated to see that actually Monday at 10 a.m. online is one of the highest likelihoods of returning products. And we were asking ourselves, why is this the case, asking various shoppers, and eventually the truth emerged that some people were had just come to work after a really enjoyable weekend, thinking about 5 days at their desk, and maybe a bit of retail therapy at 10 a.m. on a Monday on their work computer would get them through the week. And then the products arrived on a Thursday, and the weekend was almost there, and they realized, well, maybe I don't need this quite so much. And that actually, apart from, I think, being really interesting.
I thought it was going to be something much more simple, that they were returning things on Monday because they'd worn them on the weekend. Or obviously, your customers don't behave like that. That's department stores.
It's, yeah, I mean, anyway, the data said Monday for I think that reason, which is more, signals to us that shopping is entertainment. And that right now in online fashion, there is a trend for people to get subscription boxes. So fashion consumers will say, look, I don't know what to wear. I don't particularly enjoy this behavior of shopping. So please, as a service, will you send me a box of nice things once a month or once a week, and I'll keep what I like. And I think that's a very different behavior to our customers. Our customers really enjoyed the act of browsing, of searching. It is very much entertainment. It is very much emotionally driven rather than the rationally driven world of, let's say, Amazon. These insights in terms of what people are feeling when they're shopping, such as despondency over 5 days at a job they may not be enthusiastic about, that's really interesting for us to help how we define our product.
What's the one thing like that has actually sort of shocked you as coming from outside of fashion? That you go, I can't believe people would do that.
I don't know. I don't know if it's necessarily. Well, I think one of the things that surprised me was how much return rates change by geography. So return rates in Japan are like maybe very low double digits, typically in the industry. Return rates in Germany are actually almost 50% in luxury. And just trying to understand why does it change so much? And is it, and there's all sorts of variety of reasons. Some people say culturally it's about, losing face, things like that. But I think when we investigated this further and asked others, what we were told was actually that they're in the West, and actually the return rate in Germany and the US and the UK are all broadly similar. There's a lot more changes in size. People are, shorter, taller, thinner, fatter, etc. Whereas there's more homogeneity of sizing in Japan, and that leads to lower return rates. But I don't know. We're still investigating as to why that might be. But again, that really impacts our business in terms of how we promote certain products, in different markets.
I could talk, I love listening to this. It's fascinating because actually it's so far from the fashion world that I joined. But unfortunately, I'm being told we're out of time. So, Chris, thank you very, very much. It was a great pleasure to hear.
Thank you.